Hello and welcome to the Think Big series brought to you by PSG. I'm Alishia Seckam. Now, this webinar forms part of a collection of dialogues with leading speakers, and it aims to bring its audiences independent insights that help them in turn formulate their own opinions on some of South Africa's most pressing issues. Remember, the series is free, it's shareable, it's open to anyone interested, whether you're a PSG client or not. So do share and keep the conversation going on social media platforms using the hashtag ThinkBigPSG. Right, today we take a look at the future of politics in South Africa. Looking forward, what are some of the key developments shaping that future? And ultimately, what political steering does South Africa need to get back on track? This conversation happening, of course, in the run-up to the ANC's national conference in December, and we're catching up with former president of South Africa and current head of the ANC's Electoral Commission, Kgalema Motlanthe. Thanks so much, Kgalema, for joining us today. So you've sounded the alarm. The ANC is losing favor with the electorate. South Africans are becoming impatient, if they aren't completely out of patience already, as slow to no growth breeds an unemployment rate that's higher than it's ever been. While the cost of living rises, service delivery is lacking, Eskom puts us on stage 6, and corruption, lack of good governance, lack of accountability, all work to steal away from the progress we could be making. It's a ticking time bomb here. Is the alarm being heard this time around?
Well, the leadership and the general membership of the ANC state that they have had the alarm bells and they've read the writing on the wall, and hence the commitment to renew the organization. And then, of course, the impending 55th National Elective Conference coming up in December will no doubt give us a sense of where we're heading, simply by how the nomination and selection of an election of leaders is conducted. That's important. That would be an important indicator. Because if the elected collective leadership inspire confidence, then it would, of course, have a positive impact here in favor of the ANC.
Kgalema, like you say, the spotlight's on leadership, right? How much of the change that's needed now coming with the ANC's Electoral Commission, setting down new rules governing the election process within the ANC? Because while the rhetoric is that this has the potential to completely change the way the party conducts its elections, that it will change the NEC profile and will ultimately impact the way the country is governed, confidence is low that the ANC will really be able to enforce the rules, realistically speaking.
Yes, as they say, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. So the general membership, as well as the support base of the ANC and the general South Africans would want to see signs in concrete terms that indeed there's a break with the past. And that is why part of the rules that the Electoral Committee had to put to the National Executive Committee, which I adopted them, are lifted directly out of the ANC Constitution. So here, the point is to really to make it clear to the general membership as well as delegates to conference that the National Executive Committee is a very important structure in between conferences. Conferences are held on once every 5 years. And so this is a structure of leadership that's going to be in charge of organizational matters, and also if the ANC remains a governing party, this is a structure of leadership that's going to have a great influence in ultimately who gets appointed to govern the country and so on. So the trust levels can only be improved if, as I said, the individuals who form the collective leadership themselves unimpeachable and inspire confidence.
I've got to ask you, with factionalism and slate politics in play, Kgalema, how many more cans of worms are you anticipating it opening up in the run-up?
Well, I'm sure you've observed that over the weekend, the past few weeks, the provincial executive committees have, in a sense, showed their hand in their open gambit of who they want to support. And, they also throw in names in there for bargaining purposes and so on. So quite clearly, they would want to accommodate each other and so on. But of course, the rules provide for the branches to be the ones who do the nomination, and the tallying at the end of how many branches have nominated which name and so on is what determines what would ultimately end up, the names that would ultimately end up on the ballot paper.
Yeah. The ANC has been described as an elephant in some instances, slow to get going, but once in motion, you better get out of its way. Slow to get going, though. So surely, only a few months ahead of the conference, this all comes a little too late.
No, not quite, because I think it was a deliberate decision on the part of the National Executive Committee that the rules will apply starting with the National Elective Conference. So these rules didn't apply to all the regional and provincial conferences that happened earlier in the year. So they apply specifically to the National Elective Conference. And thereafter, I suppose, they will then apply to all other structures going forward.
Kgalema, do you wish you acted sooner? I mean, can you pinpoint a time where it hit you that South Africa was on the wrong path, with the wrong kind of leadership leading the way, and with the wrong map in hand?
Yeah, well, when it comes to reflection on where we could have perhaps, missed the boat, there are a number of instances and moments in our past that one believes that had we acted differently, we wouldn't be where we are today. One of those is the position of national chairperson. That position in the days before the banning of the ANC was referred to as the Speaker of the House, because conferences of the ANC were, regarded and treated as a parliament of those who were excluded from the main body politic following the establishment of the Union of South Africa. So that was a very important position. It meant that, like a speaker, the national chairperson presides over plenary sessions at conference, and therefore it should be someone who is adept in terms of the policies of the ANC and procedures of the ANC. So this position was then reinstated in the 30 years of the ANC being a proscribed organization. This position was done away with. but it was reinstated in 1991 when Oliver Tambo, who was president of the ANC at the time, but had, suffered a stroke, and therefore had to step aside so that Madiba, who had come out of prison, would then take over as president of the ANC and therefore lead the rigorous negotiations process and so on. So this position was reinstated, and Oliver Tambo became the national chairperson of the ANC. Now, going by that experience, I think where we went wrong was in Mafikeng conference in 97, when Madiba, who was head of state and president of the ANC, but was now stepping down as president of the ANC and handing the baton over to President Thabo Mbeki. We ought to have elected Madiba to be the national chairperson. And that misstep created the, conditions and possibilities of what then happened by the time we went to Polokwane conference in 2007.
Like you say, yeah. We've got hindsight, perfect science, but given the fact that it was already as far back as 97, post that misstep, why didn't you try and initiate change sooner? Yes, you were president on a short mandate, 7 months, but you were also deputy president for a period. Why weren't you more radical? Why weren't you playing more of a role in what needed to be done at that point, post the misstep, to weed out the rot?
Well, attempts were made, but the leadership collective that was elected in Polokwane had very little regard for constitutional prescripts and really relied more on numbers. If in their view you were a lone voice, it didn't matter. You could say whatever you wanted to say. It really didn't matter. They would still carry on with what they decide. So it made it this much more difficult. The recall, for instance, of President Mbeki was one of those instances where we held completely different views, but the overwhelming majority felt that there should be a recall, and all of that was triggered by how the Nicholson judgment was overturned by the Supreme Court of Appeal.
You talk about that divergence of views as far as former President Thabo Mbeki's tenure is concerned, but where we talk about good governance, where we talk about accountability, your thoughts on the ANC shielding former President Jacob Zuma against 8 votes of no confidence?
Well, the lacuna here lies between the constitution of the ANC on the one side and the constitution of the republic on the other. So the only instance where mention is made of what is contained in the constitution of the republic is that the ANC constitution simply refers to the need to establish a caucus in the assembly, in the National Assembly, and it ends there. So you have a situation, practically, where to be a member of parliament, you are sworn in, and you take a certain oath, and yet no sooner had you taken that oath than that on key issues, you have to abide by the decisions adopted in the ANC caucus.
Yeah. So not so long ago, You talked about decision paralysis taking hold, right? That with democratic processes corrupted by vote buying, slate politics, manipulation, the outcome is a leader paralyzed by doubt because he or she isn't sure why exactly they've been elected in the first place. So something that should be all empowering is instead triggering a state of inertia. Has Kgalema, the utility of the Congress then not run its course? Is it still fit for purpose?
Well, it's also not advisable to bury any organization prematurely, because you can perhaps empty it of its essence and leave it for burial, and only for other people to go in there and breathe fresh life into it, and utilize it quite differently. So the only way in which organizations come to an end is if there is a realignment of key South Africans.
Okay, so we're going to talk about that realignment in just a bit, right? In the interim, we're dealing with, and the list is endless here, but I'm going to cite just 2 issues. Stage 6 load shedding, and if that doesn't already make it tough to do business, to grow an economy, we're coming up against South Africa potentially being grey listed by the Financial Action Task Force as well, making doing business even tougher. No one wants to jump through additional compliance or regulatory hoops. Do you see government presenting a credible plan to address its deficiencies in this regard by the end of October?
Well, fortunately, all of the province of Mpumalanga sits on gas, natural gas. And so does, Waterberg in the Limpopo region, and so does the Free State in the area of Virginia. So we have natural gas, not offshore, inland. And we can very well address the balance in terms of our electricity needs by tapping into that natural gas. And you could also, by regulation, basically create many concrete jobs. If we were to say lighting, heating, cooking in each and every household or building must be on gas. So concretely, just the piping of those households creates concrete jobs. You could also have a new manufacturing sector on gas-based appliances. So the option is there. It's been there, available for us.
But it hasn't been forthcoming. We haven't seen, things happen to the extent that it instills enough investor confidence. And like I say, we're sitting on this, this precipice of being grey listed because of weaknesses that sit within with our financial or regulatory system, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the banks must take a major responsibility for that, because we may be grey listed simply because our regulatory framework seems to allow for money laundering. So this is what, even though they didn't appear before the Zondo Commission, but this is what the Zondo Commission put its finger on, that large amounts of money moved through the banks. So the siphoning out of all the largesse happened through the banks, and eventually it would end up with the Bank of Baroda, and out it goes. But this is what basically exposes South Africa to the danger of money laundering, and therefore its consequences here.
I use that example because the emphasis is on reform and reform that needs to happen fast. So, where you cited things like new blood and fresh thinking, where does that fresh thinking, the new way of doing things, the innovation come from? You know, for the most part, the ANC is old, and it begs the question, are older leaders suffering what psychologists call the scarcity mindset, holding on to what they can for the longest they can, or is there a leadership deficit?
And unfortunately, you know, these issues of uprightness and integrity don't quite admit to simple ageism, as it were. So, because you know the ANC now at this point in time is actually led by the fourth generation of COSAS leaders throughout the branches, the regions, the provinces. The current leadership is a generation of COSAS leaders throughout nationally. And I think the 55th elective conference, we are going to see even much more younger, you know, COSAS generation in that leadership. The issue really is, are they you know, well grounded in putting the people first or not? Or have they learned the bad ways of putting self ahead of the interests of the people or not? That's really the nub of the question. As far as intergenerational mix, the ANC is basically in the hands of a generation of COSAS leaders. And the older generation, that is why they are in it, you know, coming up with initiatives like Defend Our Democracy and so on, because there is no space for them to participate in the political life of the ANC.
Yeah, with a lot of the blueprints and the plans needing to be implemented, you know, less factionalism and stronger political will, quite frankly, is what's needed, right? So is there room for conversation about individual representation instead of party?
Well, you know, individual representation, it sounds okay. However, it's the coordination. You still have to coordinate these individuals and for them to be properly aligned and therefore to serve the country in its totality. Because you see, there's always a friendly tension between, you know, looking at the national picture and understanding that burden of leadership at that level, and having a constituency which you necessarily have to look after. Striking that balance is a function of coordination, a coordinated endeavor. And therefore, even the independent, at some point, will have to, you know, see whether there's alignment in, you know, their manifestos or takes as to what are the priorities.
So should coalition politics be more so on the agenda? I mean, is a realignment of political forces a viable consideration in South Africa, or does that throw South African politics into more of a state of flux?
Well, you know, coalition politics are about lots of compromises and also need lots of maturity, you know, for people who know how to prioritize national interests as opposed to narrow parochial or partisan interest, as it were. So in a sense, my view is that we ought to lay stress or emphasis on creating efficient local state or governments with local economies. That's what we should really strive for, because if we have a situation where our municipalities are dysfunctional, the local economies aren't working at all, simply because there's no supportive infrastructure and so on. So you get in a certain district, millions coming in the form of social grants. Day one. By day three, they are all out of that area. So the local economies aren't working because the local governments are dysfunctional. So in my book, we should prioritize fixing that end of our governments. Then you see, even if you have a coalition government at national level, it really wouldn't matter, because the economies and the governance and the service, because that's where ordinary citizens interface with the state. So if there's efficiency at that end, then we would have the space to decide whether coalitions are the future of this country, and look at the electoral act to see if we can amend it in a way that would strengthen our democracy.
As things stand, I mean, government can't not know what's wrong or what requires fixing within the country and the economy. Yeah. As you've cited, this is some of the first, these are some of the first steps that we need to start taking. The stumbling block is the how-to. So what's your view on how to fix things and the place to start?
Well, firstly, I mean, at a conceptual level, we ought to be able to distinguish between government and the state. These two are always conflated. The reality is that governments suffer from short-termism because they are in there for 5 years and sometimes even less than 5 years. But you need to have a stable, capable state. And for that to happen, how you select and appoint your bureaucrats, your senior managers in the state, is very, very important. That is the starting point. At the moment, that is, if you go through the Public Service Act, you will notice that the authority to appoint senior managers vests with the president. And of course, the president exercises it by delegating to ministers. And so the ministers, we've seen examples of a minister who's appointed today, and day one, when he goes to the new office, he's already followed by 2 senior managers. And without having, even given themselves time just to understand the skills mix and the experience and institutional memory that already exists in that department. So that's the nub of our problem. That is the reason why we have an unstable, incapable state, because there is no institutional memory. If I may give you an example, the best department in government over the years has always been science and technology, because the Director General in Science and Technology has always been there from the beginning. Dr. Phil Mjwaha, it's the ministers who come and go, as it really should be.
But then once you've got that in place, once there's an understanding of that, we've got 3 powerful parties in play. We've got government, we've got labor, we've got business. Each of them is feeling disempowered, and each is convinced that the other 2 are empowered. So how do we break that deadlock so that there's effective collaboration in the progress?
Well, NETLEC is a structure that has 4 chambers: civic society, labor, organized business, and government. And thus far, each one of the component members, member organizations, complain about the others. That so you'll have labor saying, no, government sends deputy ministers who are never ready and are able to take decisions, and business doesn't send CEOs. And so CEOs on the other end will also be complaining that, labor representatives are not properly authorized. They don't have the authority to take decisions and so on. So it's a structure which takes far much longer. I mean, they've been debating and discussing the need for a social compact, but they haven't even concluded those discussions. But that is the structure which is actually meant to bring about synergies between all these key stakeholders here.
It's the structure that's meant to, but what's going to be the catalyst for actual?
Well, there are models. I mean, if you take the co-determination system in Germany, which was fashioned in the wake of the end of the Second World War, when the German economy was completely destroyed, infrastructure completely destroyed, and so on, and government, organized labor, and organized business came together and they formed a golden triangle. And how it works in Germany is that the labor sits on boards of companies. So they are exposed to the same information. Part of the problem here of mistrust or little trust and suspicion and all of that is precisely because so labor goes into collective bargaining, and they bargain, and representatives of the employers plead poverty, and at whatever point they settle, but the settlement leaves all parties unhappy. And then what then happens, 2 months down the line, the MDs and CEOs get bonuses of, say, take the Sibanye, Froneman gets 300 million. And Joseph Matunja of AMCU says, look, we are only asking for 1,000. And the company says, we can't afford it. So you will always have that mistrust, deep-seated mistrust, until there's an appreciation that information is power. If labor representatives sit on the board, they will be exposed to. They'll have a better understanding.
Before I let you go, I've got to ask, because the focus is right on building an economy of inclusive growth that's investment worthy. So where would you be investing right now?
Well, in food production and energy. As I told you about gas, I see an excellent opportunity there that you could tap into our natural gas and create a completely new sector of the economy, which would also bring about balance in the energy supplies in the country. And therefore, given our levels of unemployment and so on, I would also, rather than giving and considering this basic income grant, I would rather have microfinancing and micro lending facilities in the midst of communities, so that young unemployed people who have a need for seed capital to start up something can access such micro lending, and government should not over-regulate that informal sector. What is missing, what I find missing, is how we could shine a light and lift those, because these are inspirational stories that are there, rather than to talk ourselves into a depression.
And also lift them before the light goes out, and I'm talking quite literally here, because Eskom is putting pressure on even those that are doing good.
Well, I think if we go the gas route, Eskom should be, Eskom should not be in charge of the national grid. It should be one of the players. We should have a different holding entity in charge of the national grid, so that private power producers and gas-based producers can then upload whatever is in access.
Kgalema, I can't believe that you've opened the door to a whole new conversation as we hit 30 minutes on this one. We're going to have to invite you back in so that we can take this conversation further. Unfortunately, we've run out of time this time round, but undoubtedly, with economics and politics inextricably intertwined, it's going to be interesting to see whether the shifts triggered in the political arena will be enough to get South Africa back on track economically speaking, so that investors start seeing the value of investing here. Thank you so much for having joined us today, and to our viewers, it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you as well. Communicate with us. We welcome your feedback always, and look out for the next speaker in the Think Big series.